which I'll be chairing for you today. My name is Paul Boyfield. I'm the owner and managing director of Lexington Communications. We specialise in property communications, particularly regeneration, planning and new projects. We've got a fantastic panel for you this afternoon, which I'm going to introduce in a few moments. Prior to that, Stuart Stead from Cowgills is going to just run you through a couple of things. I'll invite Stuart to do that in a moment. I think the numbers are accumulating quite quickly, but my clock has literally just turned 3. I suggest we'll give it a minute or so, just for a few more people to tune in. I'll mention this again when we get into the panel discussion, but if anyone has any comments or questions, either for the panel discussion or obviously for the Q&A with the audience at the end, just use the chat or Q&A function. We can see both here, and they will come through to us. So please feel free to use those as we go through. I can see numbers still accumulating at a very happy rate, so I'm going to let more people join. I know we're expecting quite a few this afternoon, so we aim to be underway promptly, and we aim to finish promptly. But I don't want anyone to miss anything at the beginning. Good. Well, I make it a couple of minutes past, and there are people still joining, but I expect we have pretty much everyone online now. So I'll just hand over to Stuart Stead, who's partner and head of property at Cowgills.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody. We wanted today just to take the opportunity to introduce the Northwest Homebuilders Awards. This is something that we started thinking about at Cowgills kind of pre-coronavirus. Was hoping that we'd have the first event towards the back end of this year, but obviously, given the situation, that won't be possible. So we think it will now be kind of October, November 21. The logic really was we felt as though the SME sector's got a very important role to play in helping us kind of tackle the housing crisis. I think we'll get to the numbers later, but I believe we need to build in a region of circa 300,000 a year. We're still nowhere near that target. Whilst the PLC home builders and house builders do a fantastic job, they just cannot do it on their own. So we're keen to try and support the SME sector, and I think to recognise the hard work that the various business owners are doing in that space. There's a number of awards around the country which are fantastic as well, but we think it's important to do something specifically for the SME guys. This is the first event in a number of events that will kind of lead up to the awards next year. They won't all be webinar based, obviously, because I think we're all getting a little bit zoomed out to an extent at the moment. So hopefully we can get together face to face, have a beer or a cup of coffee, whatever, in due course. And we'll be supporting this with a specific monthly newsletter that will kind of lead up to the awards as well. The whole flair of the awards is around trying to support SMEs in tackling the perennial issues that they find when trying to deliver units. I think we took some inspiration from a HBF report in 2017 that I thought was a great piece of work, that kind of set out what the challenges that the sector faces. My understanding is those are typically around kind of planning, site acquisition, kind of development bureaucracy, funding. So the awards are tailored around tackling those issues, and they're designed to recognise the organisations that are being successful in doing so. That's the kind of theme of today for me. I'd like to maybe pass back to Paul to introduce the other panel members.
Thank you very much, Stuart. So good afternoon again, everybody. And again, thank you for joining us. We're just going to now commence our panel discussion section. I'm going to introduce all of the panel members, or have them introduce themselves in a moment. We have joining us Mayor Paul Dennett, the Mayor of Salford, David Rainford, who's Property Finance Director at Cowgills, Euan Kellie, Director of Euan Kellie Property Solutions, and Awais Shahid, Director of Atzaro Real Estate. I'll invite the panel members now to just introduce themselves and make a few opening remarks about our general topic today. Paul Dennett, would you like to begin for us?
Thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, I'm Paul Dennett. I'm the City Mayor of Salford, and I also lead within the Greater Manchester Combined Authority on housing, planning, infrastructure and homelessness. Obviously delighted to be here today talking about a really important issue, that is small, medium enterprise home builders. And we know this is recognised in national policy. We also recognise the challenges are in this space ourselves within our own housing strategy. And I think when you look at where certainly Greater Manchester's been since 2007 and 8, those years of the financial crash, we've certainly been doing things in this space to try and support the SME community here within Greater Manchester. That isn't to say that ahead of us are challenges, and obviously COVID-19 has transformed our worlds in many respects, and I think obviously today it's going to be a great opportunity to come together to really reflect on that and think about, well, what does this mean for the future of Greater Manchester in light of all of this? So thanks for inviting me to be here today.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I'll ask David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Dave Rainford. I am the Property Finance Director at Cowgills. Even though my name in the box says Stuart Stead, I am not Stuart Stead's twin brother. That was an IT issue. So my background, I'm a banker by trade, banking and property finance for over about 25 years plus, 30 years. I've been on both sides of the table, from high street banks, mainstream development lenders, through to working for a small developer during the crash. So I do have a lot of sympathy and empathy with what the SME sector does face. And then latterly, for the past 9 years, really working in an advisory capacity at Cowgills, predominantly focusing on assisting SME developers raise funding, structure funding, and really act as the sort of trusted advice to guide them through the process. I mean, what I'm seeing at the moment, the challenges faced by the SME developers are no different now than they were before COVID, but COVID has sort of heightened some of those, not least access to funding, equity into schemes, how to structure schemes and access funding, because the market is somewhat subdued at the moment. And then there's the perennial issues, which we will get into more detail on today, around planning, funding, planning costs, timescales to bring sites forward. But as I say, my principal role day in, day out is talking and working with SME developers, predominantly in and around the Northwest.
Thank you very much, David. And Euan, can I ask you to go next?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks very much, Paul. Again, thanks for the invite for today. It's a great panel to be with, and a great topic to talk through. So I'm Euan Kellie. I'm the founding director of Euan Kellie Property Solutions. We're commercial town planning advisors. We set up back in 2009, right in the depths of the recession last time round. We're 6 strong as a company, and we advise a broad range of developers, landowners, investors, operators, and our goal ultimately is to navigate through the planning process as best we can. We're a small business, but our USP is what you see is what you get. So you get experienced consultants who are very, very passionate about getting the right results and about providing top quality service as well. We do a lot of work with some great developers and clients such as Solboy, Domes Construction, Hut Group, One Heritage, One Manchester, Trafford Housing Trust. And resi development is really our expertise. We can work on anything from 1,000 units all the way down to 10 dwellings. I think the SME sector is particularly prevalent in Greater Manchester. It really is the spine, I think, of residential development, because so many of these sites are deliverable, need to come forward, and our goal is to help them through the process as best we can. So thanks again, great panel to be on, and thanks for the invite.
Thanks very much, Euan. And finally, Awais Shahid, can I ask you to go next?
Thanks very much, Paul, and thank you to Cowgirls for arranging this wonderful seminar this afternoon. Stuart asked me to do this a couple of weeks back, and it coincided whilst I was abroad, but given the nature of the topic, I said, look, I really want to be part of it. It's a really good opportunity. I think it's so important right now in this current environment. So really pleased to be here. My background, I've spent over a decade working with a developer in South Manchester, delivering quite a number of mixed use and residential schemes. So that's apartment blocks with perhaps commercial on the ground floor, dedicated just housing schemes, where it's terrace houses or standalone detached houses, and quite a number of residential projects. So I've got a lot of experience in dealing with from acquisition, construction funding, finance, and all the way through the build, and what can actually go wrong during the construction period, and how going for particular lenders can be beneficial. So if there's cost overruns, for example, or there's delays on the project, what are the benefits with going with perhaps a more mainstream lender or high street banks versus the slightly more expensive but easier to obtain finance, such as the sort of bridging loans. So again, a lot of experience dealing with that. I spent about 15 years, over a decade or so, delivering quite a number of projects. And last year I decided to set up my own business, which is at Zara Real Estate. We are effectively a development company and a consultancy. So in the consultancy capacity, we were appointed by One Heritage, which is a listed Hong Kong fund. They're a registered trust, and they appointed us to be project director for One Heritage Tower, which is Salford's tallest PRS building at 55 stories. That project we've been working on for the last 12 months, notwithstanding COVID, we've been progressing extremely well with that project. And separately, Zara works with a number of other investors looking at smaller development opportunities, both again predominantly in the residential and mixed use, where it's residential with commercial on ground.
Thanks very much, Awais. Thanks again to all the panel. A good introduction there to some of the issues and challenges. I think we all know we're living in challenging times. When aren't we? But certainly 2020 has thrown up a lot already. We've got COVID, we've got Brexit, of course, we've got the economic effects of the lockdown, which I think sadly we're at the beginning of rather than the end of. But I think we're all aware of that. And with challenges, I think also inevitably come opportunities. One would imagine the government might be more willing than normal to listen to out-of-the-box, radical, innovative suggestions. They might consider things they wouldn't normally consider. And I think those of us in different sectors in industry are probably trying things that we wouldn't normally consider possible, such as attending a panel event in Manchester from abroad, or indeed doing it over Zoom in the first place. So it's a time of opportunity as well as challenge, but the challenges are certainly very significant. Against that background, Paul Dennett, can I ask you, what can local government do to support SMEs in particular? And what's happened already on that? And are there any barriers that would local government like to do more?
Thanks very much for that question, Paul. I would argue that we've been doing a lot in this space, certainly in Greater Manchester. You know, summer of last year, we all agreed a housing strategy for Greater Manchester, providing kind of policy clarity to the city region around the delivery of safe, healthy, accessible, and importantly, affordable homes, because I think it's important to acknowledge what we're dealing with here is a housing crisis and a homelessness crisis, and affordability sits at the heart of all of that. In addition to that, Greater Manchester, as colleagues will probably know, has been on with our plan for homes, jobs and the environment. You see, we don't see building homes in isolation from what's happening economically and what we want to achieve in terms of the environment within Greater Manchester. We're now committed to delivering carbon neutrality by 2038, and we're also committed to delivering the government's local housing needs, 201,000 homes over the period of the GMSF, which is the next 20 years. We're committed in that as well to delivering 50,000 affordable homes, 30,000 of which are social rent. And I don't really want to get into the language of affordability, but that is something we need to be considering here, because affordability has to have a relationship with what people earn. I think it's important to look at what's been going on in terms of our track record as well. Since 2018-19, that last year, in terms of what we've got data for, we delivered 11,500 homes in Greater Manchester, the first time since 2007 and 8 that we've actually exceeded our delivery target of 10,580. So we are actually performing in this space, in my opinion. People will know as well, the Housing Investment Loans Fund was established, the £300 million loan arrangement we managed to secure from government back in 2007 and 8 after the financial crash. That's been established and is supporting SME house builders. 63% of 54 schemes we've funded so far are SME developers. That's 34 schemes, and that's 62.7 million going into SMEs within Greater Manchester, supporting the growth that we've just been talking about. So for me, it's about policy clarity. It's about help with finance when some of the bigger institutions are not lending. It's also about working with our SME colleagues to genuinely drive an agenda of inclusivity and social value, really, because we know that through SME developers and builders, we can create jobs and opportunities for the people in Greater Manchester that will, serve the economy, into the future, really, and hopefully start, exporting construction skills around the world is where I would like to get to, because there's a clear relationship between getting schemes away and delivering that and thinking about our industrial future as a city region. And it's something I'd certainly like to spend more time doing some work on. But yeah, those are the things we're doing. I accept it's still challenging, and obviously COVID-19 brings with it additional challenges in terms of what this will mean for the future direction of the city region. But I think having that policy clarity, having that strategy and that vision, working with SME developers in the city region and continuing to build on that puts us in a really strong space, I think, for accelerating some of what we've already been doing within the city region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. If I can turn to Awais, same question, but from your perspective in the market, what have you seen, what have you perceived as the role of local government in terms of helping with SMEs, or how SMEs interact with them, and are there any different things they could be doing?
Well, I think one of the key things is availability of sites. I think we'll sort of come on to that a little bit later, but certain local authorities within the GM region offer opportunities to aid development by way of allowing developers to purchase freehold land that they own on a development lease. And that's quite useful because that massively assists with the cash flow. And that principle is whereby a developer could come along with a proven track record, has the ability, but perhaps has difficulty in obtaining funding to actually fund the purchase of a site. So it might be an agreement to say purchase subject to planning, whereby a local authority will say, we'll give you a development lease for a number of years, but typically that development lease is a very short period of time. Sometimes I've seen it as short as 12 months. And obviously the core driver there being getting the developer to actually get on with the development and push forward with actually delivering something on particular sites. That enables them to then go out to the market and obtain construction funding, proceed with the development, and then pay for the land at a later date through the build process. So where perhaps they would need to get either an investor on board to facilitate the standard purchase of the site and construction, that allows them to deal solely with the local authority, because by bringing on board investors, especially in the current climate, they are looking for ever-increasing returns as well. And that then pushes the viability of projects out. So viability is a very, very sensitive subject for various reasons, including affordable housing. but ultimately there's a huge amount of pressure on developers to deliver a certain level of profit when there's so much uncertainty around subcontractor markets at the present minute in time. Liquidity of contractors and subcontractors. We've seen quite a whole host of well-known contractors going through difficult times during the last 6 months, last 18 months, in fact, even prior to COVID. And COVID has just sort of highlighted some of the cash flow issues these contractors have had. So there's a lot more discussion I've been having with developer colleagues and friends in the industry about going down the construction management route. And that, whilst on the face of it allows the developer to retain more control over their development, so they're working with individual subcontractors, it means it's a lot more difficult for them to obtain funding, because funders traditionally don't like the construction management route. There's more opportunity for things to go wrong. Whereas if you have a lead contractor who's taking on a project, there's somebody responsible for the entire project. So it's a bit of a, one side you can have less risk by controlling the project yourself and working with individual contractors. So if your electrical contractor goes bump, you can just bring another one on board potentially without the whole project being jeopardized. Whereas on the other side, trying to obtain the funding for doing the construction management would be much harder, because most lenders would prefer you to go for a lead contractor. So there's a lot of different factors at play, and all the time you've got to manage the end user, the end purchaser. If you're dealing with the larger schemes, they're generally funded through large-scale institutional investors, where funding is pretty much agreed. You understand they're prepared to pay. But when you're dealing with smaller developments that SMEs typically deal with, it's normally in the open market, and you're there to try and find customers locally, domestically, not investors maybe sat overseas with big pension funds. And so therefore you're very much you're very much at the behest of the mortgage market as well, the residential mortgage market, which can massively affect your ability then to actually get an exit from the scheme. So again, a lot of issues at play, but what local authorities can do there is to try and assist that cash flow process by working with the developers and perhaps allowing them some form of cash flow relief through development leases.
Thanks very much, Awais. Euan, I'm going to move on to you. Same question, essentially, the role of local government, but presumably you encounter that in the field of planning as much as anything else.
Yeah, thanks so much, Paul. I think the relationship with local authorities, or the role that local authorities play as far as SME housing development is concerned, is obviously absolutely central, because fundamentally they are the decision maker as the local planning authority. And I think the key approach we take as a consultancy is it's all about collaboration, I think, and I'll apologise now, I may end up answering probably a number of questions in this response. I think that the key thing is firstly is understanding and I think appreciating the resource difficulties that local authorities have got. So many of them have got so many applications to deal with. They've got not enough staff, maybe not enough trained staff. So we always think that as far as delivery is concerned, they've got, of course, the responsibility to work with the developers, but I think it's all about collaboration. I think if they can almost give as much of a roadmap, if you like, for applicants as they possibly can, which may not guarantee planning, but at least give some milestones or a clear route, if you like, to the best way in which the right consent can be achieved, then I think if there is a consistency in that, if there's transparency in that, I think that pushes down the risk that goes to planning. I think ultimately, as we always say in our office, planning ultimately is a very risky side of the property industry, and if there wasn't a planning risk, we wouldn't have jobs. And planning, of course, covers all sorts of manifestations. It can be the outcome of planning, it can be timescales, it can be the costs. So I think local authority have got a central role, obviously, in terms of determining the applications, the process that goes through that, giving applicants hopefully as much comfort that if they, for example, almost take a sort of almost like a joint venture approach with the local authority to say, look, for this site, we are going to give you this number of documents or these clear technical studies. We're going to engage at the pre-app process with these parties. We're going to see these people. We're going to engage in this way, in this mechanism. I think if there can be a collaboration as far as that's concerned, and similarly a service delivery that meets up with that as well in terms of being responsive, trying to hit the deadlines and so on, I think all of those things will play a key role, because ultimately, planning permission is only one part of the equation. The crucial piece then is getting your planning permission and actually getting on site and you've still got timescales and constraints to go through in terms of discharging conditions. Section 106 agreements, of course, can be hugely time consuming. So they are absolutely central, and I think that's why we take the view that a joint venture, so to speak, approach is absolutely right, so that hopefully people can get the right consent in the right timescales and get on site as promptly as possible.
Thanks very much, Euan. And David, can I come to you on this? From your perspective and the work you do with your clients, how can local government support SMEs in their objectives, but essentially to get on and, to borrow a phrase, build, build, build?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose from a Northwest perspective, we've got two initial bites of the cherry. Paul Dennett's referred to one already, which is the Greater Manchester Housing Investment Fund, covering the 10 GM authorities, and then we've got Homes England. And Paul is quite right in what he says. The GM Housing Fund has supported a lot of projects within those 10 areas. As with all these things, we can always do more, and I will always end up trying to push for more, because that's my job. I think there will always be inconsistencies between different parts and different streams of government or local authority backed funding. I think we can perhaps work to bring those streams more in line, such that they, I mean ultimately those funding streams are coming from from government backed pots of money, and ideally both sides should be fairly similar in terms of delivery. I mean, specifically on Homes England funding, what I've seen primarily as a result of COVID is with a lot of mainstream funders having pared back criteria, gone on pause, taking a sabbatical in terms of funding, or concentrating on existing schemes and existing clients. We have now a logjam of development funding requirement, which is not necessarily being fulfilled by what would have been the mainstream or challenging funding market. So there is now a greater push through support and schemes being passed through to Homes England. And I've got 4 or 5 currently on with them at the moment. Issues always then come down to resource. Nobody in Homes England could have foreseen the impact of the last 3 months, of the fact that the floodgates would open into what was really an interventionist fund to solve funding where it couldn't be obtained through more conventional routes, to what is almost, I'm seeing now, is a mainstream funder in the Northwest house building market, because other lenders have tightened criteria, which means equity requirements have increased, which SME house builders just cannot fulfill at the moment. The results of that is obviously the process, and it is a process, and it probably needs more resource within Homes England. Awais has spoken about deferred land consideration arrangements with local authorities, or lease structures, and they can work, but equally they are probably going to be more favourable to a Homes England or a Greater Manchester Housing Investment Fund than perhaps some of the other funders who, I mean, if we go back, prior to the financial crash, there was lots of things done on development leases. As a result of that, they didn't work out, and funders now have a natural aversion to some of those type of structures. So I think there's some education to do within more mainstream lenders. I think there's more that we can do around supporting cash flow requirements of modular build, in terms of funding, materials off-site, which again has been a complete and utter no-no in the mainstream funding sector. So I think there's a part that the government-backed funding mechanisms can play in that arena as well.
Thanks very much, David. We've touched on some of the planning challenges and some of the funding challenges, and the role of Homes England, then we'll come back, or we can interweave those with other questions as we go through. There's a lot of topics are very much interrelated here. I referenced something that Boris said a moment ago. I'm going to avoid quoting Boris because I think that's a dangerous game. You never know if in between him saying it and you quoting it, he'll have said something else that contradicts what he said in the first place and you're out of date. But against that background, he did say build, build, build. In that speech, he made an announcement about £450 million finance package for SMEs, which can help 7,200 new homes. We don't have too many more details on that yet. Relatedly, the all-party parliamentary group for SME house builders issued a report recently calling for more investments in planning. Against that background, I'm going to come to you, Paul, again first. Can you give us your views on what the government's doing or talking about doing there, and what more needs to be done for that funding support?
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Paul. Obviously, there's a lot going on at the moment. We're in this kind of immediacy mode of responding to the crisis that COVID-19 has obviously created for the country. But moving forward, towards the end of this year, the government are going to be publishing their national infrastructure strategy. There's also going to be imminently, I understand this month, we're waiting for it, a planning policy paper for us to consider. We're entering a new comprehensive spending review and budget. So there's a lot to influence. There's also going to be a white paper on the future of devolution and also local recovery, and where does housing infrastructure planning sit within all of that. But in terms of the Prime Minister's announcement around build, 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 I guess I would just caution around that. I understand the eagerness, but I don't want to be in a situation where we're building at any cost. What we've tried to strive for here in Greater Manchester is a genuine strategic approach to development that is evidence-based and thinks about the interconnectedness of development and building within Greater Manchester. Because ultimately, I would like to think we're all committed to building places that are sustainable and address, some of the economic and social challenges we're facing, some of the housing challenges we're facing, as well as the environmental challenges as well. But in terms of the announcement, obviously he's talked about planning reforms and changes to the use of residential. Demolition to rebuild was mentioned, fast tracking approvals around extensions. This for me is tinkering around the edges in many respects. There was also a flag to the High Street revival, and we know that the government's committed, I think, £3.6 billion there. And I think there was an NAO report out today or yesterday, I think it was today actually, which talks about the 101 places that were selected and how ministers were involved in choosing 60 of them. Needless to say, I think some of the allocations there are misguided, shall we say, in terms of who are the winners and who are the losers. Also, he talked about one public estate in his announcement. Well, that's not new news at all. We've been working cross-departmental on how to, deliver on publicly held land for some time. And I think when we talk about land, we need to differentiate between land held by national government or government departments and land held locally in local government. I was wanting to come back on some of the points made before. 10 years of austerity, land receipts, capital receipts in local government have become increasingly more important to protect jobs and services in a climate of an austerity. He also referenced the 12 billion affordable homes funding, which I'm presuming will be routed through Homes England over the next 8 years. And we've already heard about the importance of having strategic relationships with Homes England to get access to some of that cash. First Homes pilot was also mentioned in his announcement. I'm really not supportive of some of that. We're in the middle of a housing crisis. We've got nearly 100,000 households on our housing waiting list here in Greater Manchester. We've just had, over 2,000 people under the Everyone In policy who've been sleeping rough on our streets in Greater Manchester. I'm not sure First Homes directly responds to the needs of the housing ecology here in Greater Manchester. We really welcome the announcement around brownfield land funding, 400 million. Greater Manchester has been allocated 81.8 million, and I saw a letter yesterday we received from MHCLG reprofiling that spend rather than it just being 16.2 million year on year for the next 5 years, which is good because that'll help us kickstart some some regeneration and also tackle some of the issues arising out of the pandemic. And as you've already highlighted, the Home Builders Fund targeted at small developers. I don't know if this is a rehashed historic announcement, but again, we await further details on all of this and what this means. But I think we're really in an important space now where, you know, the public sector, the private sector, the community and voluntary sector within Greater Manchester really need to come together and think about how do we influence these points in time that are going to be coming up around, you know, a planning policy paper, or the future of devolution, and how we, you know, ultimately respond to those challenges that COVID-19 are creating for us. So those would be my kind of initial thoughts and response on the Prime Minister's announcement. I hope that's useful. Thanks.
Very much so. Thank you, Paul. Euan, I'll come to you. Same question, same topic essentially, but any comments on what the government's announced thus far, or things that you might like them to announce in the near future?
Yeah, thanks very much, Paul. I mean, as someone who's been involved with planning now for, God, what is it? I think it might be 20 years, thereabouts. I've become a bit of a slight cynic, I suppose. I think the headlines are positive, and I always think that headlines about making changes are positive because it always gives you the sense that there's going to be a good move towards making things easier and more streamlined. But the key thing for me is I always think that it doesn't matter really how many changes you make to legislation or guidance. I think the key thing is about the implementation. It's about the delivery. You can make a system as easy as possible or as complicated as possible, and there'll still be ramifications whatever happens. I think what Mayor Dennett said, I think is absolutely right. I think the key thing is about resourcing. I think that's a central piece, really. I mean, for example, just going on to one of the points I touched on earlier on, I think that local authorities, they need the resources in terms of the officers having, I think, more support to be able to deal with more applications coming in. But I think it goes beyond just local authority officers. I think that even if a local authority, if they're dealing with a complicated planning application or even, dare I say, a straightforward application, they ultimately will be reliant on getting feedback from not just internal colleagues, but external colleagues. So, you know, Sport England, Environment Agency, County Council if required. So, you know, delays can come in across a whole range of topics, so to speak. So I think that there's a need to look at the resourcing side. I think there's the training side as well. I think, I would say generally in Greater Manchester, we're very lucky in the sense that I think we're blessed with very good officers, very good planning officers, very able officers. And I think having the ability to be commercial when you're looking at planning is a central piece as well. Understanding about how, you know, planning truly works, how development truly works as far as appraisals are concerned, the risks the applicants are taking on. So again, I think training possibly is a key element that needs to come in. I think just touching on some of the announcements that have been brought in today, it's always a curious one. The permitted development rights are always interesting to read. And I think the one, for example, just picking up one that I know, having looked at it in quite some detail so far, the one about upward extensions, I think is a great example of a headline that sounds fantastic in terms of potentially lots of new housing, lots of opportunities. But when you actually chisel away at the detail, you actually realise there's something like 41 separate clauses that you've actually got to satisfy. So I think when you drill into the detail, you actually look at it and think, well, does this actually benefit anyone, or does this actually make it more attractive to just go in and put a planning application in? I suppose the other risk with the permitted development changes is that I'm guessing there's a risk for local authorities in terms of there's less application fees for them. So that obviously has some ramifications. And of course, you might get authorities going for Article 4 directions to strip out the PD rights as well. So I think we'll wait and see. I think we'll wait and see what happens. I think there's some good noises, there's some positive noises, but I think the key thing is it's all about delivery, implementation, and how that ricochets through to helping developers get on site and build houses.
Thanks very much, Euan. I'm going to come back to you on planning reform in a moment. In a broader sense, I just flagged that because I'm going to, with an eye on the clock, combine that with a look at GMSF, or against the background of GMSF. Just before I do, I'd like to come to Awais and then David, just on our current topic, the government's £450 million announcement, or similar things it could be doing. It's throwing a lot of money around at the moment, which is borrowing, and again, are there opportunities there, and or is there more the government should be doing?
Thanks very much, Paul. I think just echoing Mayor Dennett and Euan's comments there, I think I couldn't agree more. As a developer on the coalface, you hear a lot of these headlines, but it takes a very long time for it to be filtered down into reality and an actual vehicle through which this sort of fund is actually delivered. Just coming back to Euan's comments about the funding and the shortage of perhaps actually delivering. I think David mentioned earlier with Greater Manchester Housing Fund, in terms of the fact that they've been overrun with applications, they're not having the ability to deal with it. And I think there needs to be greater infrastructure there to be able to deal with facilitating the delivery of this funding if it is to be sort of delivered through. The problem we have is that they're great headlines, but nothing has actually been formally clarified yet in detail. We've got the PD point, which I think, as you said, will come to planning and GMSF in a moment. But often there's a lot of hoops you've got to jump through to be able to get public sector funding or these sort of relief packages compared to, say, mainstream commercial lenders, where they go through the process, they understand it, they understand the developer, they understand the actual technicalities of the development itself, which makes it far simpler. I work with David on a number of funding projects, and when we always look at Greater Manchester Housing Fund as an example, or somebody similar, we think, well, actually, we've got to add an extra 2 months onto the procurement process of funding on that project because we've got to go through all the extra checks and balances just to get through that process. And often 2 months can be, time is money. That can be quite a big difference to a project. If you want to be on site, and also if you want to be finished, I alluded to earlier, if you're looking at an end market, the time for practical completion is incredibly important. If you're going to finish a development at the end of summer, where you've still got a number of families and homes that could be occupied, or where you're coming close to Christmas time, you're going to find yourself very, very difficult. And timing of practical completion is incredibly important as developers look at schemes. When do they start the build? When is it going to finish? Will they be able to sell these properties at the end and to occupy them? So we reserve judgment from the headlines that the government's been putting out there to see what will actually come to fruition. But I've got some further comments, obviously, on the permitted development rights as you bring that topic up in a moment. So,
thank you. I will come back to that, and in our final question I'm going to do after this, I'll just turn briefly to David on the same topic, the government's announcements, the APPG's report, and or further things the government ought to be announcing.
I think Awais has just touched on a couple of things there. Firstly, time is money, and obviously Euan talked about resources. Resources to me is a big thing, and I know we're going to come on to the spatial framework, etc. in a bit. But if we take resources and planning as an example, the time and time again I see developers. It's taking months and months, even to move from an outline consent through reserve matters. And what people then don't realise is that the holding cost, or if there is debt on the current site, the impact of 9-12 months through a reserve matters process impacts on profitability, cash flow for the developer. So no SME developer, or very few, can therefore run 2 or 3 projects through planning at any one point in time, because they haven't got certainty when the end date is, so they can get on site, release funding, release contribution to ongoing overhead cost, and it's the sheer cost of putting them through that planning process. So cash flow is a big issue, and obviously risk, because that's also it's eating into profit and the sheer equity calls that it needs to drive through 2 or 3 schemes through planning. As a result, SME developers are there trying to pick up schemes with vanilla consents ready to go. They're competing with the mass market, and invariably then they are being squeezed in terms of profit margin, which obviously then has a whole host of knock-on effects down the line. And also on the resourcing from a planning point of view, from my point of view, is if we've got a planning policy and guidance that's fit for purpose, if we've got planning officers who are experienced and fit for purpose, let us try and find a way to fast track those decisions without getting bogged down in spurious committees which don't often necessarily make the right judgments, all them to force it down an appeal route and cost the taxpayer money. There must be a streamlined process with the right policy and the right experienced people, as has happened through COVID. You know, within Manchester, there has been a virtual planning meetings with a number of senior people within the council. Work far better than the normal committee.
Thank you, David. And I'm going to I'm just going to make a quick note on time. We're around quarter to the hour, and I see there's quite a few questions from from our audience which we're wanting to get to. So I'm just going to just do one quick final round the panel, the topics I was wanting to pick up. You could do a whole hour on each of these, and indeed longer. So I'm just going to try and pick up one particular aspect: GMSF and imminent planning reform. A colleague of mine has just emailed me to say that Andy Burnham has just announced that the GMSF will definitely be being published in November, and a decision from GM leaders in September in advance of that. That's, I think, very welcome news. So we've got that coming, and what looks like a fairly fixed timetable. We also know imminently, as Paul referenced, the government's going to announce planning reforms, and they've mentioned it. They've floated ideas, which I think we'll find in the paper, that include zonal planning, which David would definitely offer a fast track route to decisions of the type you've spoken about, once zoned. Development corporations, abolishing planning committees, all sorts of things. Particular points from either the GMSF as planned or the type of planning reforms that are being talked about, a completely new planning system essentially. Are there opportunities for SMEs, or are there particular things that they ought to keep their eyes open for or push for within that? I'll come to you, Euan, and I'll phrase it like this. It's often been said that the big house builders, the big volume house builders, welcome the fact that the planning system is unbelievably complicated, because it acts as an effective barrier to SME competition. It can cost you £200,000 plus to submit a planning application, and you can spend 12 months before you get the answer no, and that money's gone up the spout. That puts a lot of SMEs off. A whole new system, which is potentially what the government's looking to bring in, is yet another round of potential further complication. Is it an opportunity, a new system, or a threat, do you think?
Well, I think just to mirror, I think a lot of the comments made so far, I think the devil will be in the detail in terms of how the system actually functions and how it works. I mean, just using the zonal one as an example for one moment, the theory is great, the concept could be good, but I suspect you're still going to have matters that have got to be resolved. You know, how do buildings look, space standards? There's to be a lot of fine detail to iron out. I think in terms of, this applies generally, I think, to developments, but let's use it in the vacuum of SMEs for one moment. I think that there are mechanisms that can be used now or could be adjusted to improve the process and de-risk it for them. I think that one of the key things we've done a lot of recently, we've done it with Salford City Council a couple of times, has been planning performance agreements. And that's not a new tactic or technique. That's something that's been around for 10 years plus. We think that's a mechanism that as consultants has worked very, very well, and it could work well, particularly for SMEs, where if you're effectively saying to the local authority, get the PPA in place, yes, you'd be paying more money for that service, but you're paying for a service, you're effectively getting the contract with the local authority, who in turn can use the monies to apply the resources and commit to the timescales. So I think PPAs have got a real role to play, particularly for SME developers. I think if they knew that they were going to spend an extra 5k, for example, but it would give them, you know, a further reduction in that risk, then I think they would do more and more of that. So I think that's a key role to play. Again, I'm just echoing systems that already exist. I think the pre-application route is a great tried and tested system. I think more and more of that is key to make sure that the risk is pushed down for the SME developers. And maybe one other element, just to touch on David Rainford's point before, maybe local authorities should seek to try and increase the delegation route. Maybe they should increase the threshold. So rather than having, say, 6 objectors taking a scheme to committee, maybe it should be 50 or 100, give the officers more autonomy, give them more control to streamline and get applications through quicker. So regardless of reform, there's maybe a number of mechanisms that could be used that exist already.
Thanks, Euan. Just with an eye on the clock, what I'm going to do, I'm going to come to you, Paul, on this topic, and then if it's all right with Awais and David, I'm going to move on to questions from the audience then, and just invite you to comment on this topic as Stuart goes through those. But Paul, I can't miss the chance, as Andy's just made the announcement, GMSF going ahead, but picking on that, or the possibility of an almost brand new planning system. Are there opportunities there for SMEs, and are there threats?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. As I'd already committed to this, I knew the press conference was taking place today. He did ask me to join him, but you know, I stuck with cowgirls, so hopefully you're impressed with that. But anyway, yeah, just responding to some of the points you've made. I mean, it might be useful just for everyone who's watching, just so you've got clarity on what's been agreed around GMSF. So there is going to be an 8-week consultation on the draft of the publication starting in November 2020. Prior to that, every district in Greater Manchester will be asked to approve and agree the publication, and also the agreement to submit the publication and obviously all the feedback to the Secretary of State in September and October of this year. That'll happen at full councils. We'll then publish a post-consultation report after that, and we'll submit to the Secretary of State hopefully in June of 2021, with adoption expected at some point in 2022. And as I said earlier, you know, the GMSF hangs together with lots of other work the CA are doing around housing strategy, infrastructure, the local industrial strategy, and all those sorts of things. In terms of planning reforms, I just think we've got to be really careful here. You know, I don't want us over the next few years or so to get caught up in changing a system that, you know, maybe some minor tweaks here and there will help improve things. I think the point that's been made around resourcing is a really valid one. You know, councils up and down the country have seen 10 years of cuts. My council in Salford has seen 211 million taken out of its revenue budget. 53% of core funding from central government has gone. And that's at a time when we're seeing growing pressures in adult social care and children's services. So actually having the resources to invest in that regeneration, economic development and planning function of local authorities has been a huge challenge nationally in England, up and down the country. So I would welcome additional resources there. I agree with the point that was just made by you, and I think the pre-planning application route is a good route. And, you know, I know my officers, certainly in the City Council, actively engage with developers all the time through that route to try and, you know, get positive determinations in planning. I would caution against the abolition of planning committees. I think it's really important that there's a gap between the executive function of local authorities and the non-executive function of local authorities, because I don't want to get into a situation where, you know, executive functions are being challenged, being political ultimately on planning matters. I mean, the whole rationale around having a committee is people aren't whipped on that. They're there to uphold planning legislation, policy, the National Planning Policy Framework. And I think that's really important principle that we look to retain in whatever reforms the government may or may not be thinking about. On the point around development corporations, we're already doing some of this. I mean, I guess a good example in Greater Manchester would be the Mayoral Development Corporation in Stockport, which, you know, I think is driving some really interesting things. And I think all eyes are on Stockport to see what the successes of that are in terms of whether or not we need to mimic that or do that in other parts of Greater Manchester. But again, none of this is new. You know, this kind of reminds me of those urban regeneration company days. You know, we had one at Media City UK, which led to the regeneration of Salford Quays, as colleagues will know. So, you know, again, the devil will be in the detail on all of this. I really welcome, though, that government's now put its hand in its pocket. It's come forward with brownfield land funding without forcing Greater Manchester to increase its local housing numbers. We've also received 54 million, I think, in shovel-ready infrastructure funding, which is great because that helps us respond to some of the issues that were being raised in the historic consultations, you know, in 2016 and 2019 on the GMSF, where the residents of Greater Manchester were saying their concerns were, you know, affordable housing, infrastructure, contributions to public realm, and, you know, viability. And we've got to be honest about this, will continue to be a challenge for Greater Manchester. So getting this money out the door, supporting our SME builders, and then going back to government for more support and more funding for Greater Manchester is certainly the space I'm in. So hopefully that answers the question. Thank you.
It does indeed very well. Thank you very much, Paul. Apologies again to Awais and David. I think we're keen to get some questions in from the audience, and we're into the last 10 minutes. So I'll hand over to Stuart to bring some of those in.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. We've got a few questions on here. I think most of which have been touched upon to an extent already. But I think the first one here is probably one for Paul Dennett. Sorry, Paul, I know you're kind of on the spot today. This is from Tim Rackham at Create Homes. Surely, does the panel see return of more traditional council homes to try and help meet the affordability gap?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. We know when we look at what's been coming through the planning system of late that we've not been delivering truly affordable housing at the level that we need to. In Greater Manchester at the moment, we've got nearly 100,000 households on the housing waiting list across the 10 local authorities. We also know, and it's an interesting statistic this, since 1980, as a consequence of right to buy, I think it's over 95,000 council homes have been purchased under right to buy. We know nationally 40% of those find their way into the private rented sector. So for me, absolutely, getting councils, building council housing again is absolutely the space I'm in Salford. Because if you look at history, it was only post-World War II, when councils up and down the country were building council houses, that we actually saw homelessness rendered statistically significant. So history teaches some answers here, and obviously making sure we do that in a local way, working with SME builders, is very much the space I'm in. I mean, I'd go one step further probably in Salford. I'd love for the council to be setting up its own development company, and we started to do that in Dereve, but at the moment we're working with local developers within the city and within Greater Manchester to build truly affordable housing, because fundamentally the market's not doing it because of many of the viability challenges we face here in Greater Manchester. I could talk ages on this issue. I won't go on. But that answers the question.
Thanks, Paul. Next question is really probably one for Euan, really. Linked to PD rights, Euan, obviously the kind of recent announcements. Questions really, and I think it's been answered to an extent already, as I say, but what do you think the effects on in terms of providing quality houses and satisfying the need for real families to get on the housing ladder? Do you think that the PD rights will support that, or you think it's a opportunity for maybe lower quality propositions?
Yeah, but it's a very good question. I suspect that a lot of people have learned a lot from the office to resi experience from 2013 onwards, where there has been some very good examples of it done well, but in equal measure there's been lots of, I suppose, whilst maybe commercially suitable solutions, maybe not the best, most habitable accommodations being delivered. I mean, I think we'll wait and see. Going back to the upward extensions point, just to use that as an example, I mean, there's a lot of there's a huge provision in there for things such as natural light and space standards and how the buildings look. There's a lot of triggers in there that on the face of it you would have thought will control development maybe more than the office to resi market, office to resi PD rights did. I think we'll just have to wait and see. I think the key thing is going to be whether the PD rights actually do lead to there being a benefit for developers. Is it a route where they actually think, well, we use this because it will get us to the space we need to get to, or is it going to be a case of, well, actually, if we weigh all these PD rights up, we may as well just go for a planning application anyway, because we'll have more control. That's better use of our finances, and we know how to control the risk a bit more. I think the other thing which I touched on earlier on as well will be whether any local authorities put the Article 4 designations in place to block out some of the PD rights. Of course, that's happened in numerous occasions over the years. So again, bit of a cop-out answer, so to speak, but I think we'll wait and see. We'll wait and see when it comes into effect, and we'll wait and see how it's applied by authorities and how people use it.
Yeah, I think that kind of leads into the final question, really. So some comments here from a Gavin Sorby at Buttress, picking up on a previous email that Gavin sent to me a week or two ago as well, just in terms of quality of design, really, and Gavin's point here is in terms of measuring quality, that's often done by fairly easily achievable metrics in terms of kind of numbers of units, carbon targets, and affordability. But that doesn't necessarily give you the kind of intangible qualities of a kind of great place to live and great design. I think from Gavin's comments previously, it was something like 7% of new houses have been by an architect's office. So just wonder what your view was really in terms of how's that quality kind of promoted through the new homes that are coming on stream. Maybe it's one for Paul. Paul there. Sorry, Paul, did you catch that?
Do you want to start?
Yeah. It's just about promoting quality, Paul, really,
Stuart, I'm happy to come in on this as well,
yeah, sure.
Because quality is quite a key point about development. And I'll let Dennett start, and I'll kind of go after.
Sure, absolutely, and I agree. We want to build homes that stand the test of time. So, I'm absolutely in this around the importance of quality. But I think we have to be honest about some of the challenges we face here around delivering quality, because we talk about viability, but what do we mean by viability, and can we unpack what we mean by that? Well, we're talking about delivering truly affordable housing, and a lot of the schemes coming through private sector market and planning process are not delivering that. Certainly not without significant levels of public subsidy through whichever route that might be. Local authorities invest in themselves, what they decide to do with their land holdings, or, the Homes England funding we've been talking about earlier on in the call. And then on top of that, you've got contributions to public realm. During COVID-19, we've all been enjoying much more active forms of transport, walking and cycling and green space. And I know certainly over the years in Salford, we've invested millions into cycling and walking infrastructure off-road throughout the whole of the city to encourage more of that sort of active travel. But developer contributions have been absolutely critical in making some of that happen. Then obviously the future is net zero carbon homes, which very much speaks into that quality space. We want to do more around sustainable drainage, contributions to schools, capital receipts for local authorities to protect jobs and services, social value, creating job opportunities, taking on apprenticeships, traineeships. I guess the reason why I'm saying that is because quality sits in amongst all of those other challenges we're facing. And that isn't to say we don't want to deliver quality homes that stand the test of time. But I guess what I'm doing is trying to be a realist in all of this. There's only so much you can do with a tight financial envelope, and decisions have to be made. And I guess sometimes, as a consequence of that, is quality compromised? Discuss. I think we can point to probably lots of examples where that's the case, but it's about being honest about the challenges ahead of us. So hopefully that's useful.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Awais?
Yeah, I think, again, that's where the SME developers come in. That's where we differ from the larger development house builders, where we can actually provide sort of bespoke, unique homes, and we take a bit more time and care about how we design them, because we look at them from our own perspective. I know I've done quite a number of not only apartment schemes, but housing schemes. And whenever I've done them, I've looked at them as a young professional when I first started out in the industry. And then as I've become a father to two young children, I look at it and say, well, actually, do you know, I need extra storage here. I need this. And, you look at the scheme, the design of the scheme, and making sure it's fit for purpose. I think one of the comments is about creating a home for real families. And that's where the SMEs differ from the bog standard carbon copy homes that house builders make up and down the country. So what we can bring is a bit of uniqueness to those developments and bring a bit of our own pizzazz to ensure that it stands out. Okay, that there is viability constraints and costs, but quality does not need to mean expense from a developer's perspective. It's about taking that additional time and working with a good design team as well to produce something that's a little bit unique, a little bit different, and is actually fit for purpose on a daily sort of lifestyle point of view. COVID-19 has highlighted a huge number of issues in the large PRS blocks, with the amenity provisions being closed because of social distancing, etc. The fact that a lot of apartments don't have their own balconies, mental health issues that have arisen from the back of these big tower blocks that are being built. So on the consultancy side of my business, where I'm working on One Heritage Tower, for example, our key focus has really been on the social well-being of residents in that that building. It's all got to work in a whole ecosystem, essentially, where you've got to consider the well-being of young professionals who are perhaps stuck for the last 3 months in apartment blocks in the city. They've got no family around them, they've got no friends, they don't know anybody, newly moved to the city. They're really struggling, and it's about picking up on these points and making sure as developers that we're conscious of this and providing developments that address these needs of the demographic moving into these buildings.
Great, thanks, Awais. So, Paul, that's the last of the kind of formal questions there in the chat box, and probably draws things to a natural conclusion, maybe.
Yes, I think so. We've had a really fascinating discussion this afternoon, and I think we're at a almost watershed moment in terms of so many different issues. And whilst that does present challenges, I think it presents great opportunities for the SME sector against the background of a undeniable need for quality new homes across the board. So I think the panelists' contributions have all been fantastic. It's normal at this point that I invite our audience to show their appreciation with a round of applause. We can't really do that, so I will offer on their behalf to our panelists a vote of thanks and a virtual round of applause, and just say thank you to them, and thank you for everybody for tuning in. Great that you could all do that, and I hope you've found it as fascinating as I have. Thank you all very much, and we'll hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.